I was not normal, and I was sort of an outsider. We'd moved from the village, Greenwich Village, to Staten Island, very conservative in the 1950s conservative neighborhood, and I was the freak, and the kid who acted on TV, the kid whose family didn't go to church, the only family that didn't go to church, and so my high school years, like I guess like a lot of comedians, I was miserable. Played a lot of chess, which I'm good at, but it wasn't until I think into maybe my sophomore or junior year in college. I went to NYU, and moved back into the city and back into the village, and I just discovered that I could, talk to girls if I was funny, and, uh, and I discovered I could be funny, and suddenly, it helped me come out of my shell, I would say, and I think as also so we're talking late '60s, and this is a time when alternative everything was exploding, so traditional theater, traditional circus, all of this stuff was being expanded with street theater and spectacle and things not everything having to be literary and based on plays, and so, there was a boom in the United States, one-ring circuses, Pickle Family Circus in California, later Big Apple, all influenced by European one-ring circuses, and there was a new interesting clown because of Lecoq's school in Paris, where he taught the personal clown with just a single red nose, and the idea, I mean, that was partly revolutionary, was the clown did not have to come from the circus. You didn't have to be part of some circus family to be a clown, and anybody could do it, and women could do it. And it started to be a lot, even back in the late '60s, early '70s, a lot of women taking clown classes. And so I started experimenting with that. I got to study with Hubby Burgess, who happened to be at NYU in the acting program, even though I was not in the acting program then. And I just, I got hooked on circus skills and got pretty good. I learned, pretty much a certain intermediate level at everything. Juggling and tumbling and wire walking and unicycle, all that stuff. And then I studied elsewhere. I studied with a couple of Russians, Gregory Fedin and Nina Krasavina, who came over from Moscow and opened up a circus school in Hoboken. And uh, anyway, I just got into it, and I before I knew it, that's what I in an early Lecoq workshop, I met a friend, became a friend, Fred Yockers, and Fred and I ended up working together for the next dozen years as partners, and he's on the West Coast, but he loves to build, and the circus studio you see behind me, we built this ourselves, took a couple of years, a couple of other clown carpenters, but so that goes way back there. So I guess the second story is the accurate answer to your question.
You stumbled into you never wanted it, it just happened. You became a sort of a
Yeah, it
clown.
was a gradual process. There was not a eureka moment really. It was like, oh yeah, let's do this. Oh yeah, well let's try that. Yeah, I don't know. I have a writer's mentality. I like to and a storyteller's mentality. So I mean, I like to tell stories. I like anything I do wanna add meaning to things. I do wanna make I was a big proponent of clown theater in the '80s, and we had ran 2 festivals, introducing a lot of new artists, so making theater out of clowning. So physical comedy to me was in many ways the same as clown, because I think clown one thing about clown that I didn't mention is I think it's rooted often in physicality, because it has to do with our vulnerabilities and our being mistake prone, error prone, not perfect, and accepting that and being able to laugh at it. Self-deprecating humor, I think, is essential to clowning. I think it was, Martha Graham who said, "Nothing is more revealing than movement." And I think often when we do screw up, it is reflected in the body. Even a simple walking down the street and tripping, how you react is the comedy. The things people do to cover their embarrassment is the comedy. So clowns, I don't see clowns as being just verbal. I think it has to be embodied, physically in their work. And physical comedy can appear anywhere. It can appear in dance, it can appear in stand up, it can appear in a straight play, it could just be a moment, but physical comedy, why is it funny? It is because I think it does reveal that vulnerability. It does expose the character. The character is the victim. It's not physical, uh, dexterity and beauty and all those things you see in the Olympics or something. It is us, making mistakes and screwing up, and so what I teach is physical comedy, but it's very applicable to clown, but I think it's applicable to any kind of performing because, I mean, if you look at, you had all that slapstick comedy in the silent film era where a lot of the movies, especially the shorts, are just all gags, and it's nonstop physical comedy. And when sound came in and screwball comedies became more favored and they were more sophisticated on various levels, but you still look in there and you just, you see they still keep variety of physical comedy gags, and it could be, it could just be a couple of moments in a movie or a TV show or something, but they reveal something about character. So it is, I'd like to think, universal.
What I noticed, so when I did the Gaulier course and I did my destro, it wasn't necessarily about like physical gags or anything like that. It was, you find a moment, you do something stupid and you try and repeat it. But with I've heard in some places, like I spoke to Michelle Matlock and she told
Mhm.
me things about like the pie gag or other things. And I heard that there's a difference between American style of clowning and European style of clowning. Is that true? Or am I talking
Well, by American style clowning, if you mean three-ring American circus, I would say, yeah, that's true, but Uh, I don't think most clowns I know, I mean, who are, let's be frank, real performers and not amateurs dressing up as clowns and doing birthday parties, I'm sorry to stereotype that, but yeah, I mean, there is this mentality that, here are the 8 gags, the 10 gags, and you do these and you'll be funny. Now, if you're good, you can make this classic material breathe and be funny, but it's very limiting. For example, in 1973, I went to Ringling Brothers Clown College. They call it a college, even though it's 8 weeks long. And I went because even then I was not enamored of Ringling Brothers, and I didn't think like, this is gonna have all the secrets. But it was free, and it was in Florida, and you lived on the beach, and so why not go, And it got better later on because they had some, better people running it. I think Steve Smith was excellent, for example, Dick Monday, but the training when I went there was pretty useless. I
oh,
mean, and this is what you may be talking about, it really was, these are the gags, learn them, and, they look at your face, "Oh, yeah, I think you'd be a white face clown, or you'd be an August," and the white face tends to be the number one, the straight man, and the August is more of the buffoon, the dumber, sillier one, and everything was totally external, you know? And, so, I mean, that exists, I think, all over the world, but I think it was magnified in the United States, some of it because of the three-ring circus. It wasn't the clown's fault, but they really couldn't, when the audience was half the audience is 500,000 feet away from, you know, you could only do something really, really broad and big. So I would not want to call that the American style of clowning. I would say that everybody I know in the United States who's serious about clowning is much closer to what you might call the European style of comedy. I mean, what has triumphed is what came from Lecoq, what's been coming from Gaulier, what they've seen in one-ring circuses, and also just a revival of interest in all the movie greats, especially but not exclusively from the silent era, and YouTube now, you can see so much. You can see classic clowns. You can go and see Grok, the Swiss clown, not to be confused, please, with Elon Musk's AI app. Grock, you can see his entire, essentially one man, there were 2 people, but it's basically him, show that he brought to theaters. He was like the first kind of circus clown to be able to play at a huge theater. and bring in an audience. But you can see all of that. So people uh, now are much more educated. In 1973, you couldn't see that. I remember, in one of the what they call revival house, movie houses in Manhattan that would show uh like the Elgin, which is now the Joyce Dance Theater, but the Elgin would have a Buster Keaton festival once a year, and they show Buster Keaton movies. We didn't have VCRs then, and like you'd go there, and like half the clowns in New York would be sitting in the audience taking notes, So we they just didn't have we didn't have all of these sources. And when we did our first clown theater festival in '83, no, it was the second one in '85. I got a little before then, I got a letter, not an email, didn't exist, a letter from a guy in Europe, I think might have even been in Switzerland. He says, "Well, you probably have this, but I have a VHS tape of Grok's act if you don't have it." I said, "Oh my god, yeah." It was like the holy grail, and, he sent it to me, and I had to have it, converted to the American system, and we showed it on a on a little, like, 17-inch diameter television at our second Clown Theater Festival, and people showed up. Bill Irwin came to see it, and, it was like a revelation. It was just like a little VHS tape on a tiny monitor, and you got, like, 50 people crowding around. So, things have changed, things have changed, and you can see it, you can see everything. So, yeah, I wouldn't say, maybe you'd be more likely. I don't know about Michelle's background, uh, but I think people don't I don't think there's much of this just do those gags training over here either. And, I know when I teach, I will teach gag structures,
Okay.
like, okay, everybody's, "Oh, comedy comes in 3." Yeah, but what does that mean? How do you use that? What makes for a good 3? You know? Uh So we'll take something that's physical things, we'll try to well, how do we structure that, and we have 10 different versions. Well, which one what number 3 really worked and why? But not like, "Oh, you're gonna do the levitation gag or the dead or alive gag, or you're gonna do this." And, if we ever do those, how can we make them our own? They're not evil, but uncreative if that's all you rely on. Don't think you could invent anything. And if you think, "Oh, just doing that's funny because it's funny, and I don't, if I do it." So, that's obviously a dead end.
You said that so when you're teaching physical comedy, you like to do gag structure. What is gag structure? Is it like you tell a joke? I don't know. Like, for example, Jimmy Carr says, what do you say? He says, "My dad is Irish." Let me say why I look like this. My dad's Irish, and he says, "My mum is Roger Federer," because he looks like Federer. But would a physical gag work similar, like with the rule of three, the
Yeah,
pull out
yeah. I mean,
reveal?
you look at, there's reversals, right? You're playing with what's a gag structure? I mean, you're writing and you're leading the audience along. You also, comedy depends on surprise, right? So you're playing with their expectations. You're setting up an expectation and then you're reversing it. So yeah, so there's different ways of doing that. And what I was saying about the three-part gag, and verbal comedians use this all the time, and people who write humor use it all the time. They repeat something twice, or it's either the same or similar, and then they somehow reverse it the third time, and, that's a three-part gag. Example in one of his early but really great shows, Regard of Flight, Bill Irwin. It's available on YouTube. Highly recommend it. He's being chased by a journalist across the stage, and he goes out through the audience, comes back across the stage. So this chase is going around, but each time he crosses the stage, he trips. So the first two times he looks back, is startled. So the third time he comes, well, now the audience is saying, well, we're gonna get bored if he does the exact same thing a third time. He's set up the pattern, right? So what's he gonna do the third time? And so there's a lot of possibilities, but basically what he did, he comes up onto the stage and he's almost at the spot where he's gonna trip, and the first 2 trips were kinda mild, he didn't fall. He gives this kinda shit-eating grin to the audience like, "I got this figured out," right? And he leaps over that spot, takes another step, trips, falls smack on his face, and that's a 3-part gag. It's a simple example, but it's not as easy. I mean, everybody who tries anything with comedy knows comedy comes in threes. It's easy to say, it's easy to observe, but it's harder to figure out how to apply that. And I think, sometimes it's often the part three can be very absurdist even. But, we'll play with that. Another gag structure that I take credit for naming. Certainly didn't invent it, but it's very interesting. It's called the oblivious gag. I call it the oblivious gag, and that is that the main character is oblivious to what's going on. So instead of always like, in a clown routine, you're like, oh, I got hit. Oh, I'm gonna, you know, like the big reaction to stuff. The clown isn't aware what's going on. Either they could be creating great harm. I'm eating a banana, I toss the peel over my shoulder, somebody comes along, slips on it and falls. I don't know. I go my merry way. Or I'm in grave danger. Uh, and I'm almost dying, and I'm totally unaware of it. And Harold Lloyd had a couple of brilliant examples of this. He did a lot of stuff on the top of buildings, and he's at the top of this construction site, top of a building that's not finished, and these girders, and he's blindfolded for reasons I won't get into, and he's walking along, and he doesn't realize, um, the character doesn't realize that he almost died 8 times, like he'll step here, another girder on a crane will come into focus, and he'll step right onto that and go off. So those are oblivious gags. There's another one he does. The name of the movie is escaping me, but it's the one where he's in a banana republic, a South American country that his doctor sends him to because he's very nervous and he has to go there to relax. And he's like, oh, it's wonderful here. It's so relaxing. And he doesn't know there's a revolution going on. He's walking down the street, and everything that happens, he is mistaking for something else. He survives again, almost getting killed 7 times without knowing it. So that's an oblivious gag, and it can be very funny, and also say something about the character. So those are a couple of examples of structures.
How do you do them on stage, and like how do you go about creating them? Because when you create a bit, but it often doesn't go as you expected. But how do you create the same? Like, I don't know, if someone's
Well,
playing this oblivious gag,
you wouldn't create a skyscraper.
that would be funny.
Oh, no, 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 it could be anything, I mean, it can just be you got 3 people on stage and, uh, I mean, a simple example, a little cliche-ish, but, I could be carrying a board and I turn around without looking, right? And it would normally whack you on the back of the head, but that's when you bend down to tie your shoelace or something, and you come up, and so
Ah,
you just escape that. You can do it very simply with on a stage with more easily with some props, some stuff. I like to work. I don't teach mime. I studied mime. I was terrible. I think mime training is great, but I work with stuff. I mean, because part of my philosophy behind physical comedy is we live in a physical world. We live with stuff. We live with objects, we live with furniture, we live with doors, and I use them. If I go to teach somewhere and it's just a bare dance studio, I feel like, uh-oh, what I should have brought more stuff. But if I go into some theater space and it just has junk all over the place, I'm like, yes, yes, use this, use that, yes. But yeah, so you can create. People don't have any problem coming up with ideas with that.
one of the things that I found occasionally when I was in Gaulier, and some people that came from very rigid backgrounds doing the clown course, and they'll be like, "Your body has to go here, this and that." And
Uh,
I didn't really like that, and they often did quite crap in those kinds of performances. Whilst when people were a bit more easygoing, they played with it, I did quite well. And I always
yeah.
thought with a lot of the clown stuff, when you're creating it, don't be too rigid. It's only when you find something, then you start making it a bit more refined.
Yeah, I don't know what that training was, or, or if that person correctly followed that training. Uh, you know, rigidity of movement and clowning don't go together. I mean, unless you're really playing a character who's very rigid, right? I think the openness is very important, uh, and back to your earlier comments about movement and physicality versus Gaulier, I don't see them at all contradictory. I think obviously Gaulier, there are people who were turned off by his confrontational approach and people who benefited from it, which is fine. But he had enormous influence, not only amongst traditional clowns, but Sacha Baron Cohen and many others. So I think what he did, and I never studied with him or even met him, so I'm not an expert, but I think he definitely opened people up to all kinds of possibilities, and above all, seeking their own originality and not to fall back on cliche or past stuff, to be inventive. I mean, that's a sense I get from him, and also embolden the clown to be brash, to be satirical, to be confrontational. Doesn't have to be a sweet, adorable, cuddly character, which is, I think a stereotype that we should not embody. Again, maybe hospital clowns have to go in that direction more because that's what they need to do for their audience, and that is fine. But what Gaulier did is important. I think physical comedy, though, and movement in general, there is a lot of people who do clowning and other kinds of comedy don't move well. They don't have a sense of movement. They're not free. They don't realize they don't just have to stand there, and they also don't have a vocabulary of movement. I mean, mime is its specific vocabulary of movement, and it's not just illusions. It's not I'm going to walk against the wind and come up against the wall kind of thing. It's all kinds of dynamic possibilities with articulation, with dynamic range,
Mm.
timing, physical comedy in general. I mean, there just is there is one thing I teach, and I don't think anybody else does teach, at least to the same extent. There is a rich vocabulary of physical comedy. I can teach 20 tricks with coats, another 20 tricks with chairs, but again, I use them. Uh, I think not just as tricks, but things have developed that, all kinds of ways of, partner work, using each other's bodies is very, I think, important to physical comedy, unless you're a solo performer, but anything with 2 or more people, you don't have to just, be on sharing the stage, but things can happen physically, and I think they lack that imagination. I constantly see uh, scenes that cry out for physical comedy, but cry out for, explore that situation, or don't rush past that moment. That's a delicious moment there. Get stuck in. I mean, clown training, they'll often talk about clown moments. Oh, there's these moments where the clown is revealed, where the clown is stuck. But those are where some of the richest material comes from. And sometimes, there's another expression, happy accidents. Sometimes we call it something similar. But basically, if something goes wrong in a clown show, the last thing you want to do is cover it up. What you want to be is to go with it and use it. And, there are many stories of things that went wrong and happening. That Grok, for example, was once doing something on his chair. He was sitting on the back of a chair and he slipped off, but this is by accident. And he came down here and he went straight through the chair. The chair broke and he got stuck and he couldn't get out. And then finally, somehow, he found the energy, the force to just, I don't know how he did it, vertically rise up and boom, land sitting on the armrests, and it was amazing. And he said, "I am keeping that in the show." So he rehearsed it, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. It took him months, and he finally did it, and then it became a regular part of his show. So yeah, my point is that it's anything that opens you up creatively to more possibilities, as I think Gaulier is very likely wonderful at doing. But you still have to create material, and you're on stage. You're in a physical space, in a physical world with other physical human beings, and you want to have wide range of possibilities and vocabulary to take advantage of that. You're still, it's wonderful you're creative, but you're still performing for an audience. You still, at some level, have to be a writer and a director and not just a free spirit. One criticism a lot of us have had about people who take an intro clown course, and often Lecoq based training. And this is not a put down of Lecoq, who was very important, significant, but they come out and they got the red nose and they kind of come out on stage and they know how to make an entrance and be there and be shy and and, and they never have any material. They never take it. So you have to make that baby clown of yours, this new spirit. You have to put it out there in the world. How does it react in this and that situation? How does this react in this physical world? How does it play off other people and their realities?
You mentioned a lot about like gags, and you mentioned that. I mean, Gaulier and Lecoq have definitely influenced the performers world in good, both of them individually, massively. That has to be said in every direction.
Absolutely.
Uh, how would you say what you teach in terms of like, prepared physical gags different to perhaps like a Gaulier inspired or like a Spy Monkey or perhaps a Lecoq clown workshop or physical comedy workshop?
Okay. Again, I haven't seen Gaulier's workshops, and I I did not go to Lecoq's school in his main program, but I was there in 1990 in Paris, living in Paris. I was on a Fulbright, and they had a a clown stage, which was quite excellent, actually. I mean, it was pretty extensive. It was for 3 nights a week, I guess 3 hours, and it ran for, like, 10 weeks, and it was Lecoq, Norman Taylor, and 2 other teachers. So you got Lecoq about a quarter of the time, but, yeah, basically, you got a lot of Lecoq. So and in his regular course, his 2-year program, clowning does not come until the last few weeks of
Yeah.
the 2nd year. It's like the culmination. Here, and often because the French are used to free schools and they couldn't afford his 2-year program. It's mostly foreigners, whereas the course I took was mostly French people.
Ah,
And so I may have gotten almost as much clown training from Lecoq as people who spent 2 years there, except I didn't get what came before. But I had studied, by the way. My first training that got me into clowning was a Lecoq course. I should have said the word when I said I met Fred Yockers. It was taught by Cheryl McFadden, who later became famous on Star Trek, I guess, and, not that I've seen it. So, I mean, that was my first exposure. So, I am somewhat familiar with what Lecoq taught, and it was exploratory, and it was about discovering this inner clown, and it really didn't get to the stage of creating material of and I think in a 2-year program, they're constantly creating material. I think what I do and, I'm almost always working with experienced performers, so they bring a lot to it, right? And they bring some sense of comedy from whatever part of the comedy world they are from, and so with the physical comedy, I'm not only working with the physical comedy vocabulary and the gag structures, we try to create material. So I always have them, okay, you have these skills, you have these, let's try to put this all together. And I'll have them, go and work on something for a half hour or something, come back and then I'll have them do it again, even though this is a short workshop. So I think what a lot of people complain about in general is that they don't do that in workshops. Partly it's the marketability of workshops. The more intro to the thing kind of workshop is gonna get more students usually, and it's harder to you kinda get up to the point where you got all these new insights or feeling or something, but there's not time to really work on it. And I mean, I know at some clown schools, I mean, I know at Lecoq's, they certainly did worked on performance pieces and soirees. And there's another clown school in Paris whose name I forget, right in the eastern suburbs, which I visited. Saw a couple of their student shows. I mean, so people in longer programs do at least get to work on material. but most people don't have time to go for a 1 year or 2 year program, and so most of the audience for workshops, I think, is shorter workshops, and by nature, they don't get to the, "Well, let's at least try to create something with it." So I try to do that as best I can.
in a short space of time. Get to where they try and create something.
Yeah. Well, that's why I don't like somebody says, "Well, could you do a 3-hour workshop?" Well, I can, but, I feel like it's superficial. I often end up just showing them some cool tricks, but then I don't want them to think that's what physical comedy is, just cool tricks. So, I mean, what I'm off this workshop coming up in London in May is only 2 days because they're trying it out and make sure they can sell it. Uh, but I'm gonna be in Europe all spring, and I'm teaching, like, in 5 other cities, and mostly it's, like, 4-day workshops all day, so there is more time. I mean, that comes to, like, 30 hours of training or something.
Okay.
It's never enough time.
What's your process of like teaching people who, so you said most of the people that come to your workshops are already sort of, they're not empty vessels. They're people with all sorts of things already in there. How do you go about getting them to learn it? Because I know that in some of the workshops I've been in, like in Matteo Destro, they already had a lot of training beforehand. So it was hard for them to absorb what was there. And then occasionally Gaulier, because some of them have been like to theatre school and or acting school, and that's can be quite rigid. Was Gurley is a bit more free, so that was quite difficult for some of them. What's it like for you when someone's like from a, I don't know, I think you've, have you taught stand-ups before? Or is,
Well, I've had stand-up comedians in my class, or people who at least did some of that. Well, I don't think I've had a big problem with that.
okay,
I think people are there because they wanna try something new. I think, to toot my own horn, I mean, I think I'm good at relaxing students, and, I mean, we work hard, we're serious, but often very silly. I don't put big expectations on them to master every single skill I show them. And, I will say, listen, the most skilled person here is not necessarily going to be the funniest. Okay. And it's the other thing is, again, I was bragging before that a lot of what I teach, nobody is teaching. I mean, there are people say they're teaching physical comedy, and they teach, a couple of slaps, a couple of trips, a couple of falls, and that's about it. My curriculum is, if not unique, it's pretty singular, and so in that regard, it's new to everybody. It's not like there are too many people who come in there unless they've studied with me before, who really know how to do what I'm showing, or have done the exact same thing. I haven't had too much of a problem with resistance or rigidity. I mean, people are there and they want to try it out, and maybe they'll discover it's not for them, and they don't think they can integrate it into what they do, whatever their strongest point is, at least directly. But I find people have, it's fun stuff too. It's fun stuff, and we laugh a lot. So I really haven't had a problem with that. Certainly with resistance or rigidity.
okay.
People give it their all.
So, and this is going to be a bit annoying because I just want to make sure I understand this. So, creativity, create an idea, do that, but rigidity doesn't help with creating clown bits. But with the clown structure, I don't want to go too much into it because you're going to do a workshop in London. And if I say too much on here,
Workshop.
workshop in London. What's the, so do you, so you do a few exercises in the class, you get them to create things, but how do you, give them the gag structure? Because I do a bit of jujitsu, and a lot of the times when you're doing this, the sparring, they give you little games so that you have to. So one person's inside controls to keep you there and maybe submit you. You're at the bottom. You have to try and like get out of it in a creative way. Is that what you do? Like you put certain situational games in, and the student has to find a creative way to do things with their partner.
Yeah, that sounds somewhat similar because I teach skills, but I don't want them to be used, presentationally. I don't want them to be, "Ta-da! I did that." Not that's circus performing, nothing wrong with it, but it's not clown character. It's not character at all, unless your character is a straight performer, but we're going for something different, right? So because I teach skills and I don't want them to be used presentationally, I want them to be used contextually, you could say. I want them to be, seem spontaneous and often happening to the person. Then I give them situations, sometimes it is a specific gag structure, we get into that, or it could be a very simple situation and they have to do it, they have to motivate it. In fact, one evolution in my teaching that I'm pleased with is that I don't teach basically a single skill without having them try to do something with it. I don't wait till like, oh, now remember all these skills, now we're going to use them. No, I teach, like, for example, I will teach almost part of a warm up in the beginning, but it's a simple counterbalance where, I don't know if I step back, you could see me. Yeah, sort of. I would have a partner's hand and they would have each other's arms actually. Yeah, want to be in this is my wife, Riley. Hello, Riley. Right? And we could lean back, right? Uh, it's basically a counterbalance. Like if either of us lets go, we're gonna fall, right? And then there's all kinds of variations on it where, you can go up and down, you can be on one foot, and it's a very simple thing. Like I say, it's more and there we go. It's more of a almost of a warm up, a partner warm up, as it gets you in tune with your partner. But is it a trick? It's hardly a trick, really. Although, like anything, you can do variations on it and get more complicated. You're on one foot and this and that. But what I immediately have them do is, okay, you have to come up with in pairs a situation where this actually happens in. You know,
Ah,
people come up with very imaginative stuff, like they're over a cliff. I mean, over, a crevice or, I don't know. But, and it's just, it's not that they have to come up with something brilliant, but what is nice is, I mean, there's no pressure, go, 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 go. Maybe we see a half dozen pairs do it. And, some are obviously funnier than others, but usually there's a couple that are really good. And so right away they see, you know, holy moly, this I almost said holy shit. Holy moly, something that simple could be funny. They try to let go and they almost fall and they catch. Yeah. There's all kinds of possibilities even with that. And so we immediately get that mentality going, like the first hour of the class. Another example, a lot of people who teach physical comedy will teach trips, which is good, but the mechanics of tripping are not complex. Hooking one foot behind the other and kind of letting your body go, as it, losing control and then catching yourself with the other foot. It's it is always, in the reaction to it, or are you covering it up, or are you embarrassed? Is there somebody, how do you act if you're alone? How do you act if somebody's watching? And then we did stuff with, or how do you act if it's important, something important going on? You put in an embarrassing situation. Bill Irwin actually took a little workshop with him back in the, oh my God, he's, I guess, and he had a nice exercise where he did a graduation ceremony, pomp and circumstance was playing, and everybody comes up to get their diploma, but they have to, just walk up 3 steps to get it from and of course you're supposed to trip,
ah,
right? Just mom and dad are there, shooting the video, the proud moment. So, it's situation. Another thing I came up with was just two people walking down the street together talking, right? And one of them trips. So what are the possibilities? And so you put it in a situation, and people came up with one that I particularly remember. They're coming down, they're walking together, and one person is very distraught. Her mother is dying or something. It's just horrible, and the other person's being sympathetic, and then the listener trips, and the person who's talking doesn't even notice it, right? And she keeps going on, this and this and this. You know, and then the person's stumbling and crawling, and they finally catch up to her just in time to pretend that they were there the whole time, and, it was quite funny, but these are the possibilities if you frame them, and if you give a few sometimes, ingredients like that, people come up with great stuff. So you start like with the trip, you start with the idea that, well, it's the reaction that matters, and the reaction is going to mostly be influenced by who's looking at you. I guess you could do something funny if you were, alone, unobserved, but usually a lot more potential if you're being watched. So those are some examples.
So, from what I gathered here, and this is going to say very rambling and very silly, but I watched the film The Matrix, and what's it called? Morpheus says to Neo, "I can only show you the door. You're the one that got to walk through it. So you got to find your own way." And I'm guessing, in some ways, it's a bit like when you're setting up games or teaching people physical comedy, and a bit like when I was in Gaulier, they set up games up with a partner where you'd be under certain conditions, but you'd find your own personality or things that will work for you based on those games or those exercises. And I'm guessing that's what you do there when you're doing with the structure with the games. You put people in certain things so they can find out if they want to, what will work for them in the physical comedy sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Although I do have a lot of door moves.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, uh, I ran until COVID interrupted it. I ran the New York City Physical Comedy Lab for how many years? 7 years? 10 years? I don't even remember. We had a loft place in Brooklyn, and twice a month, people would come, and it was open to anybody, but, it was all kind of performers in the field, and we would just share stuff and play and teach each other stuff, and I had seen this old clip, actually from Thomas Edison, one of the first films ever made of these, vaudevillians with these kind of trick doors, and at first I went, "How did they do that? How did they do that?" Then I figured it all out, and I actually had some doors made and brought to the studio, and I still have them. And they did give you. I mean, one had like a what's called a star trap. It's a trap door, trap window, but kind of shaped like a star. You dive through it, it snaps back. There's other doors that you can open it this way, or you can rotate it like a revolving door because it's really a door within a door. So we were coming with a lot of gags like that. But I just mentioned that. I mean, I know you mean something different by going through a door, but I just throw that in there. Yeah, absolutely. I want students to create their own material and their own thing. And like I said, I don't really teach traditional gags. The only one I think I've really used as a premise was The Dead or Alive, which, if you're not familiar with it, is one character appears to be dead, probably because they're playing a trick on the other. And then the other one has to get the body out of there, and there's an urgency to it. But then the body sort of starts coming to life, and there's all kinds of physical business possible, which is why one reason I've done it is that it does lend itself to a lot of good partner work, partner acrobatic work, and I don't teach it, the way Ringling Brothers would have taught it. This is the gag. You go here, you do this, you do that.
Mm.
Oh, ooh, oh, and boom, out. I had, uh, 2 students when I was teaching in Barcelona. This is going back 15 years, but, Salvatore Vetti, who is actually well known as a performer. Giuseppe Vetti, excuse me, his partner was Salvatore. But they did a whole thing as funeral directors with a body that they thought was dead. And it was yeah, okay, it was a traditional gag, but it wasn't what you would see in Ringling Brothers or anywhere. They but yeah, to answer your question, I think I answered it right. I mean, yes, absolutely want them to make up their own stuff, and they can. They're brilliant. I mean, I sit there and I laugh and I'm going, "I'm getting paid. I'm getting paid for them to entertain me. This is cool. This is a good gig."
Now, I'm going to ask 3 or 4 more questions on this.
Okay.
So there's, what's the bit I wanted to get at? I think there's a thing that runs in a lot of forms of comedy, whether it be clowning, whether it be stand, whether it be alternative comedy. And a lot of the times people say that your weaknesses are your strengths. What would you say is an example of a physical comedian or physical thing that you've seen where exemplify the of using that? So, for example, I know that I heard, and I've not seen much of Benny Hill, but I heard that when they were making that program, he was a guy that thought he was a ladies' man or something. And the running gag was that he would try and do something impressive and he would do something stupid and get into a lot of trouble or something. The perfection there was that he thought he was this, but he wasn't aware that he wasn't good at this. And then he would do something stupid. And that's where a lot of the gags were.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The classic premise. I think, I'll give you one example. There is an exercise that I think I got from Cheryl McFadden, that Lecoq teacher I mentioned, but it's a good one of, and I this one I will still do sometimes, where you have the class in a group and they're in a circle or an oval, whatever, and they just walk around the room maintaining the oval, one following the other, a natural walk, try to get them, not to modify it, because I asked them to study the person in front of them, and this goes on like 5 minutes, I give them a checklist. Well, how are they, where are the shoulders? What part is leading? What's the rhythm? What's the emphasis? What are the knees? I almost give them a checklist, and I have to try to get them. Don't change your posture to look good, right? And fairly successful. And then, no surprise, I have them imitate the person they were following, and it's very funny because there's just like this moment of recognition. But sometimes the victim doesn't necessarily, that's me, but everybody else is like, "Oh, yeah, oh, yeah." And obviously, some of the imitations are better than others, and some of the people have more idiosyncratic postures than others. Nobody's, myself included, nobody's, neutral. We're all characters. So they do that, and then I have them take the imitation of them, whether they believe it or not, and play with it and even exaggerate it. So if they walk very decisively or their chest out, okay, take that and take it up 25%, take it up 50%, and see what you get. And so, I mean, that's a way of, it could lead to something, directly in character, in creating a character, but being aware of your body and how you move, but also like, yeah, that's okay. We all we all have that, and that's part of the point. And the clown, I would say, tries to be honest with themselves about that and use it. You're talking about the unsuccessful Benny Hill character. There's a lot of like clowns who are, you might say, boisterous or bossy. And I mean, that's the way I was, and so maybe I am that way in life, and I was exaggerating or playing with it, but I was the great Blondini who could do anything. Of course, I couldn't, and I got my comeuppance from my lowly partner. But that grows out of that kind of stuff.
What I noticed in my time in Gaulier and in Matteo Destro is that you only find out about what your weaknesses are through a period of time of uncomfortable exercises. Now, I'm quite a forthright person. A lot of lessons in that school, what made it so good was that they told you things about yourself and that you maybe don't realize till 4 or 5 years later. Like,
Mm.
yeah, Philippe Gaulier, he said this to me. You think you're clever, don't you? And that's a true thing I didn't realize until later on. And he said that I was a bit of an arse licker, which are only sort of weaknesses that sound so simple and straightforward, but I've only realized about myself now. And I should use that for comic effect. I think I'm clever than what I am. How can you make that bloody funnier?
Yeah.
That's your weakness, and the things that, and I only realized, yeah, it's funny. That's what made that score so good. They're very good at deciding what your weaknesses are, what your stupid things are, and then you realize what they said about you was true, and then you can use it. But that's what I found, and is it a bit like when you find your voice in these sort of things, like your weaknesses to exploit in physical comedy or stand-up comedy? You don't rush it; you just find it through being in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, I think that's all insightful. I wouldn't say that that's with all the thrust of my teaching, I'm not that personal or psychological in what I do, you know, but yeah, I mean, I think from that kind of finding your personal persona, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree.
And the thing that I've found a bit, it's funny, like, I don't know, in the 40s, 50s, or 60s, or even 70s, there was a big thing for like physical comedy, Benny Hill, and all those programs. But now everything's all about stand up and like sitcoms and all that. But now physical comedy isn't as big a thing as it used to be. Like, why do you think that is? And what do you, yeah, what do you think is the great thing about physical comedy? Yeah, do you think makes physical comedy so brilliant? And what's made you fall in love with it?
Okay, the last question first.
Okay.
It's the easier one. I don't know. I mean, I've always liked I've always been a physical person, so that that's part of it. As I told you, I fell in love with circus stuff in my teens, which led me to some vocabulary, both in acrobatics and manipulation, that kind of opened me up to different kinds of possibilities. So that's part of it. I think it's strange to me, honestly, because I'm a very verbal person. I read a lot, I write a lot, I make jokes. My oldest son is a stand-up comedian, performs under the name Nat Towsen, and I call him Nathaniel, but he's Nat Towsen, and he's pretty successful. And we talk about comedy all the time. And I think I could be very funny verbally. I think me and him match wits a lot, sometimes trying to top each other. And but one of the greatest compliments I ever got many years ago was, "You're like another Woody Allen, but with muscles." That was back when Woody Allen was a good guy, but I I I have, I was gonna say a weakness, I would say a weakness, but I have an attraction to physical and visual comedy. Like, I can enjoy a stand-up show and not remember it a week later, but I remember physical bits, 40 years later. Yeah, so there was some stupid, sitcom on American television I watched when I was 12 years old, My Three Sons, Fred McMurray and William Frawley. Yeah. Anyway, William Frawley is the grandfather. There's no wife, and he's taking there's three kids, and he bakes a pie, and he says, "Don't you touch that pie," and it's cut into slices, and the first son comes along, and he can't resist. He takes a slice, and then he moves all of the slices together, so it won't look like one's missing. But then the second son does it, and he tries the same thing, and then the third son does it. I forget the resolution, but it's funny to me. I still remember that gag. It's stuck in my mind. So there's something in my brain that's wired to appreciate that kind of thing and to remember it. I don't know why. In terms of physical comedy not being as popular as before, I don't agree with that at all, and I'll tell you why. And, you may have mentioned at the beginning, but I do have a physical comedy blog, which you can easily find, and I did it for about 7 or 8 years, and then I got overwhelmed, and I stopped doing it, then I just started doing it in the past year again, but it has a wealth of material, and it's totally non-commercial labor of love. But if you wanna find clips of good physical comedy that I like, and they're from everywhere, right? Go to the blog.com, but if you just look up my name, you'll find it. Uh, but I started a new series called, because this is to answer your question, or to counter the assumption that physical comedy is something from a bygone era. People usually said silent film comedies or something. So the a feature called Physical Comedy is Everywhere, and what I'm doing is a series of posts. I only have a couple up so far, pointing out where we're seeing physical comedy, and we just don't recognize it as such. My first post was about Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert is, a late night comedian and mostly famous for his monologue. He does physical comedy all the time. Mostly it's mime. He doesn't consider himself a mime, but he grew out of Second City Improv and all these improvs where you're making up props and stuff, and so he's always illustrating things, so I have a lot of clips of. So you wouldn't call him primarily a physical comedian, but it's an important part of his identity. Another post I did was, the Super Bowl football, American football is, obviously super big over here, and advertisers spend an enormous amount of money to advertise on it. $8 million for a 1 minute ad, plus some of the production costs. So they have these elaborate commercials. Most of them have celebrities in them. You look at them, and there's supposed to a third of them, a third. And this is the like the ad what's the word, but it's like the major ad campaign of the year. It's like the big reveal. A third of them have physical comedy in them. A third. We don't talk about it, but it's there, and so I have all those clips. The halftime show, the controversial Bad Bunny halftime show, which I loved, had physical comedy in it. I mean, he falls through a roof into another building. And this is all live on stage on the football field. They build this elaborate set. He does a trust exercise fall where he's caught by people. Uh, he walks between. What are they doing? There's the bit when somebody juggles and you walk between the clubs, and he did it between. I forget what it was. Anyway, so it's all over the place, and so I'm doing more and more samples like that. So there are a lot of, I would say, people who are strictly stand-up comics. Uh, you see less of it. They tend to be more wedded to the microphone and the bare stage. But even with that, you take somebody like Chris Fleming, if you've ever seen him, he's nonstop physical. If you look at Jim Carrey's stand-up work, he's extremely physical. I think you see more physical comedy in sketch and in improv than from straight stand-ups. But, certainly going back to Chevy Chase and Jim Belushi, but, Chris Farley. I mean, there's just so many people who do it. And then, like I said, physical comedy doesn't have to be like the style. This is a physical comedy show or piece. It could be something that's appropriate in the moment. So you take somebody like Josh Johnson, who is getting very big, and I love his work, which is very political, and this unique combination of storytelling and stand-up comedy, I'd say.
Hmm.
And you wouldn't say he's a physical comedian, but there are points when he's telling a story, he'll act out a certain position, he'll contort his body or he'll sit on his stool in a certain way and stay, and so he will physicalize often one of the comic highlights of his story will become physical. And that works for him. I'm not saying, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everything has to be physical comedy. I can enjoy, I do. I mean, I watch Netflix comedy specials and my son has hosted some of his own shows that he's hosted, for years sometimes, where he had a lot of guests on. And I think he has good taste in guests, but I do see a lot of straight stand up, and I enjoy it on a lot of levels. I mean, I laugh, and I like the content, which is especially in this political, highly charged era where you know words matter and being able to talk about it matters. I think all of that's very important. So I wouldn't. I'm certainly not. I don't want to put them as in competition with each other any more than a good Italian meal is in competition with a good Japanese meal or whatever. I think they're all part of, a good life, assets to the world. You can like Andrew Wyeth and Jackson Pollock, at the same time. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, I just, from what I've seen, it physical comedy didn't seem to be as broadcast as it was before. Like, didn't seem like the main thing as it was before. Yes,
Yeah,
that's what I was getting at. But yeah,
yeah, yeah.
shit, you got
You
tape
could say,
phase.
yeah. It's not. I would say that's correct. It's not the main thing, but I don't know if it's been the main thing. Um, in 100 years. Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton, and Charlie Chaplin, and Pino Lane. Yeah, it was the main thing, and because they didn't have other than some placards, they didn't have words at their disposal. But if you start looking, and I'm gonna keep bombarding my blog readers with examples. It really is a lot more prevalent. Because you got stuff that is kind of stupid. stupid human tricks, America's home videos or funniest home videos. They're they're almost all physical comedy, people doing stupid things physically.
Yeah.
I mean, one feeling I sometimes have if I go to a stand-up show and let's say it's an hour long and there's 6 comedians, I find it refreshing to see somebody actually move. If everybody comes out there and they grab the mic and they talk, and the next one comes out, grabs the mic and they talk. Again, I may like it and it may be funny. I always find it more expressive if it involves everything.
Now, to anyone that is listening right now, what advice would you give for the performer's journey?
Okay, well, that's a big question. Enjoy it. Be thankful if you can keep at it, that it will lead to a far more interesting life than working in a cubicle. Well, this is important that you will probably not get rich. You will probably be disappointed in a lot of regards, but you will travel. You will meet wonderful people. You will have a much better chance of being part of a community or communities than at a straight job. And get a license as an electrician so you can make a lot of money quick when you have to. Uh, that's given in retrospect. But, yeah, yeah, be open, try new things. If you're, you say your audience is stand-ups. I was talking to my son about this, and he said, he knows a lot of people in stand-up who have, taken clown workshops. That's become a bit of a more popular thing for them these days, and, that they find that it opens them up a bit to possibilities, to being a little less structured, not totally bound by a script and a narrative and how things are supposed to go, to be freer, to be crazy, to invent things. So I think that could be an advantage to a stand-up comedian studying clown or physical comedy, besides just being fun. I would say, on a more serious note, we live in critical times right now. Obviously worse in the United States right now than in the UK with Trump, but I think we all have to be involved and artistically. It's not that everything we do artistically has to be political, but I think it's important that we all really stay informed and don't get too narrow of a focus on succeeding with what we're doing professionally, and be aware of the world and read and talk to other people and be a citizen in the world, because there's not going to be much of a world for your career if you're not. And it will also, I think, inform what you do and ultimately make your artistic work better. So be smart. Don't be afraid to be a bit learned and intellectual. Some of the smartest people I know are clowns, and some of the most informed people I know are clowns. So that's a good thing.
Now, contrary to the image of clowns,
Well, clowns, there is a couple books with clowns, and I'm not making this up. They say the clowns are the intellectuals of the circus, and they didn't just weren't so much referring to their performances per se, but that often clowns in the circus have been people who are more likely to be people who read and full of big ideas and more, we say, intellectual, if you want to call it that. But not to put down traditional circus performers, but to raise up clowns.
and any circus performers that's offended by it, I apologize.
Hey, some of my best friends.
Now, to anyone that wants to find out about you, how do they find out about you? I know you got a workshop coming up in London in May, and
Yeah,
you're
well, the best way is the blog. I mean, my email address is on the blog, which is just my name at Gmail. So, you can write me. I will write you back. Um, my workshop schedule is on the blog, and I try to post something every week or every once a week, twice a week. And I think if you're at all interested in physical comedy, I think you'd find a lot there. I mean, I'm coming up on 500 posts, and it's a lot, and they're all pretty substantial. I call it a blogopedia because it's sort of an archive, And again, I don't make any money out of it. There's no advertising, anything like that. These days, I just do workshops really because I enjoy it and I enjoy the travel and I meet the people. So that's cool for me. But my workshop schedule is there, and I don't do that many. Like I'm doing like a half dozen this spring, and I may not do any for another 6 months or something. I have other creative projects, and sometimes I actually like to just relax, and which means doing construction.
Fair
We
enough.
have a we built a anybody ever gets near New York, we're just outside of New York City, and, if anybody gets here, we're in Greenwood Lake, New York, and come visit. We have a a circus studio, and, it's quite a complex now, so we're not quite up to Slava's Paris, the state outside of Paris, but it's interesting.
Okay. Well, guys, you know where to go. You get free cocktails, free pint of Guinness, and free beer. Okay. Sorry, I should have said that.
Yeah, you probably well, I don't know about the cocktails. I mean, I could arrange that. You'll usually get some beer or Guinness. That's not a problem.
Fair enough. Well, guys, hope you've enjoyed the episodes. I'll see you
Yeah.
guys soon. You know to know about John. Go to his workshop, go to his fantastic blog. Next episodes are probably going to be focused around sitcom writers. But yeah, take care, guys.
Okay. Thank you.